There are not many people who would want to be called a Scarlet Lady. Well, Carol Everett doesn't seem to mind. In fact, I've got in my hands a hardbound book called The Scarlet Lady, subtitled Confessions of a Successful Abortionist. Carol operated women's clinics, specializing in abortion. She was quite an entrepreneur. A success, as pro-choice people might say. She overcame her own abortion and 2 marriages to speak out candidly on her life as an abortionist. I appreciate her taking time to join in this conversation. As I said a moment ago, Carol, not many women want to be known as a Scarlet Lady. I know you've done that tongue-in-cheek, but in fact, there is much in your past that deeply embarrasses and shames you. How do you live with who you were and all the babies you killed?
Well, if I did not know who I was in Christ, I couldn't talk to you, and I certainly couldn't be known as a Scarlet Lady, but I have to believe that Jesus Christ indeed died for those sins, and if I just confess and repent, as the Bible says, then he is just to forgive.
You now work with an organization that is pro-life, and you operate the pro-life division of Marketplace Christian Network. So you've done more than just say, gee, I'm sorry I performed all those abortions. You become actively involved now in the pro-life movement.
It seemed the thing to do. Seemed the way to reconcile those experiences back, and it's not because I feel guilty. It's because I want to tell the truth about what's happening to young women. First of all, we sold abortions, and we sold abortions by marketing contraceptives. We told them there was a way they could be safely sexually active, knowing full well that that was going to fuel our abortion clinics. And I think it's time that people understood that any time someone tells you that something is free and easy, that we need to ask ourselves some questions. But I deliberately, Bob, went into schools, told those kids that they could come to me for birth control counseling because their parents wouldn't help them, knowing that they would not be responsible. First of all, we gave them a low-dose pill with a high rate of pregnancy, one we knew they would get pregnant on, don't misunderstand me. And we could determine that by this. First of all, we knew teenagers. You know, their mothers nag them to go to school, nag them to take their medicine. They won't nag them to take the birth control pill because they don't know about it. Teenagers don't do anything at the same time every day, and that pill had to be taken at the same time every day in order to provide for protection. We could look at the sexual activity and tell that when they went on a method of contraception, that sexual activity went from 0 or once a week to 5 to 7 times a week. We could achieve our agenda, which was 3 to 5 abortions between the ages of 13 and 18.
Hang on a minute. 3 to 5 abortions?
Well, and the most I ever saw a young woman have was 9 abortions.
You saw a teenager have 9?
Yes. It is a method of birth control.
Postnatal birth control, absolutely.
42.9%, 43% of abortions today in this nation are repeat abortions. Repeat abortions. Not for rape, not for incest, for birth control.
So what you're suggesting is the former operator of an abortion clinic that we have devised a multi-million-dollar industry in this company based on the promiscuous indiscretions of young people, and that many of the people in the abortion industry are not bleeding heart do-gooders who are deeply concerned about the trauma of a teenage girl bearing an illegitimate child, but they in fact are...
Absolutely, and why would they do that? Because I worked on a straight commission, and those abortionists work on a straight commission. You know, I made no money if that girl didn't have an abortion. 0, no money. But if she had an abortion, I made $25. That doesn't sound like a lot of money.
Now, hang on a minute, because you're giving some startling stuff here. You're telling me this is like somebody selling shoes down at J.C. Penney?
It is the largest unregulated legal industry in our nation today, Bob. Bigger than drugs because it's legal.
Let's go a little bit into your background. You were an entrepreneurially driven business person. You had a strong drive to succeed, and you indicate in your book that part of what fueled your entrepreneurialism was a strong dislike for men. You were getting back at men through this?
Oh, sure. I've been hurt by men, hurt very badly by men, hurt by my father, hurt by every man in my life. And this was a very simple way to get back at men and women. But deeper than that, every time another woman had an abortion, she looked okay, and in some very twisted way, perhaps I, too, was okay, because, you see, Bob, I couldn't reconcile my own abortion experience.
You had an abortion.
I had an abortion, and I knew I'd killed my baby.
Even though you were running abortion clinics, you're suggesting that in the depths of your conscience, you knew what was going on.
Well, I had the abortion before I became involved in the abortion industry. This was just a way to daily tell myself I was okay, because every time another woman had an abortion, she looked okay, and surely in some strange way perhaps I was.
Let's go back a little bit to your background, because you do cover that in the book. You became pregnant in high school.
Yes.
16 years of age. How did that affect who you were to become later and how you were to handle this issue?
I think that it was one of the tools that I used, of course, to tell young women that they didn't have to have that child at 16 as I did. But, you know, as I look back on that, Bob, we're telling a young woman today she can do anything in the world except have a baby in a crisis situation, and somehow that cheapens a woman. But I wish you could meet my crisis pregnancy now. She's 30 years old, and it was tough. But it was tough for parents out there who plan to have children. And there's something about that young man that is very special. And so when I talk about how I once talked about him as a problem pregnancy, I'm afraid my heart quickens, because that young man is one of my biggest supporters today.
Now, we've just read in the press recently that a Baltimore school has sanctioned the Norplant.
Norplant.
And they're going to spend anywhere from $700 to $800 a student on that, presumably as a money-saving measure to avoid having paid aid to families with dependent children and to get them off the welfare system to keep from having babies, because Medicaid will pay for both ends of it. I mean, if you want to have the Norplant, Medicaid will pay for it. Where have we crumbled in a society to the point where maybe it's better to do something like that than pick up the bill later, some might argue?
Well, I think that we've made some real mistakes in not looking at the truth of what Maryland is. Maryland is the only state that has allowed abortion profiteers to move in, has literally stopped the state from giving out information to young women about the alternatives to abortion. And also in Maryland, they have state-funded abortions. And Norplant is an easy way to fuel the abortion industry. And let's talk about that.
No, wait a minute. And we're going to get back to your story in a moment, but I want to touch on this issue. Why is Norplant a way to fuel the abortion industry at stopping pregnancies?
It doesn't work. It's just like RU-486. If that young woman becomes pregnant, they will tell her that she cannot have that baby because she had that Norplant, and they know there's a high rate of pregnancy with Norplant, and so indeed they are fueling the abortion industry because she feels protected. She's sexually active, she becomes pregnant, and now because she had the Norplant in her arm, she must have a surgical abortion. And so they're going to get it 2 and 3 ways that way, and also she'll continue, because women who have abortions make significant decisions about their reproductive systems. We have replacement babies, repeat abortions, or sterilization procedures, but we do something significant with our reproductive system. What they're banking on is she'll have continued abortions. But I want to go back to something you said earlier, helping the poor women. Bob, poor women do not choose abortion. The average woman having an abortion in this nation today is 24 years of age, 2 or more years of college, and above average income. The truth of the matter is she had her first and second and probably third abortion as a teen, but it is now a method of birth control for her. And the poor women know that they can get more money by having those babies. And sadly enough, poor women value life more than middle-income women. Now, they have a different value system.
Hold on. Now, just a moment ago, you said something that seems contradictory to social logic, and that is that the abortionists are willing to give these young women contraceptive devices because they know it will fuel the industry. And yet, but what we're being told is that, in fact, these young women are promiscuous anyway. They're going to do it anyway. We might as well do what we can to stop unwanted pregnancies. You're saying that by the very issuance of a contraceptive device, we are increasing their promiscuity and fueling the marketing potential of the abortion industry?
Come on, Bob. So now you're going to believe the abortionists? They told us for years that they would go in and teach our kids how to have safe sex and it would decrease the pregnancy rate. And everywhere they've gone in, the pregnancy rate has gone right up, the birth rate has gone right down because the abortion rate has gone right up. Let's get real. When are we going to start asking questions like, why in the world are we teaching kids how to have safe sex? Let's give kids some values. You know, we don't take our kids out, get them real drunk, and try to teach them how to drive safely. Why in the world would we do something like sexually train them when we know that's destructive to them also?
So there's a bottom line here, Carol. Really what you're saying is that this is more than just an abortion issue, that the entire ramifications of this involve a social big lie from beginning to end that is being told to our young people, and we're lying to them about their sexuality. We're lying to them about the effectiveness of contraception. We're lying to them about the effects of abortion. It's one big string of lies.
Yes, I'm saying that. And I'm saying they know, perhaps not at the lower levels, but the upper echelon management understand the concept. They know what they're doing to our kids.
Now, in your book, you share very candidly, very poignantly, your own situation with regards to abortion, what you went through, and your own personal life, and it's very candid. You bring up a point that when you married Tom, he had you sign an agreement stating that if you got pregnant, you would abort the baby.
Yes. Yes, I agreed.
And eventually that marriage ended in divorce.
Well, like 75% of other relationships that abortion occurs in, was destroyed. But what happened when I agreed not to have an abortion if I became pregnant was I never planned to get pregnant. And then when I found myself pregnant, I had two choices. I could choose my husband or my baby. And I made the wrong choice. I chose my husband. And the moment I woke up, I knew I had killed my baby, not a glob of tissue, not a product of conception like they told me. And that's what I wanted to believe, that it was my child.
Now, you know, I'm not a naive person, Carol, by any stretch of the imagination, but I have to confess, when I read your book, it was a little shocking to think that a man would ask his wife in advance to agree to an abortion if he got her pregnant. That's pretty startling to me, that to think that a relationship could be based on that. Are you suggesting that yours is not an isolated case, that in many other relationships out there, the whole idea of abortion undergirds a lot of the relational aspects of sexuality, even in marriage?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, the relationship of men and women has changed. The sexual mood of our country has changed. Why in the world would we think that the other things didn't change? You know, we've got to understand that in the last 20 years, we've moved a long way, and it's all, unfortunately, the wrong way.
You married Tom. You had a baby. You got pregnant. You had an abortion. And you write in your book, I was supposed to nurture and protect that baby, but I killed it. Back in the hospital room, my mind and emotions were like a runaway train headed for a big crash. Did that crash lead you then, in part, into a zealot on behalf of abortion? Was that a way of kind of expunging what you'd been through?
Absolutely. It was the only way. I talked to Tom. I thought surely he'd share my grief and remorse. He didn't. I hated him, and so I punished him, and our relationship was destroyed. I went back to the abortionist and told him how bad I felt after the abortion. He said, Carol, your problems have nothing to do with the abortion. See this psychiatrist. The psychiatrist reiterated exactly what the abortionist told him to. You have no problems with this abortion. You really have many problems with your mother. Let's work with them. That was not what I needed to hear. So it must be me. I must be the only woman that had trouble with abortion. I must be the problem. And so I internalized, I denied, I stopped being a mother. I stopped cooking and cleaning. I stopped being a woman. I stopped wearing dresses. Everything about me changed completely. My looks, everything, because you see, there was something wrong with me.
You had a sense of denial about your femininity. In other words, you were punishing yourself. You were punishing men. You were really setting off on a very, very destructive course at that point in life.
Very destructive. 13 years of destruction. Because you see, what I did is I internalized it to the point that I could not tell anyone I'd been bad enough to kill my own child. I could never tell anyone that I had an abortion, even though I sold abortions to other women.
Now, you also were very candid about the fact of your unfaithfulness to Tom and the fact that you sort of did this to punish him for his insistence on the abortion. Is there a feeling because of what you went through that promiscuity, in fact, is a form of self-punishment that some women are going through as a result of abortions?
Yes, I think that's pretty common. And the women I work with today, I see promiscuity is very common. And what we're doing is self-punishment, but it's also punishing the men that have been involved with us. We're going to get back at them. And I punished Tom for 16 years, 16 long years. And finally, on the day our daughter had been dead for 16 years, we cried together. And then 8 months later, he apologized for his part in the abortion. And that's when I could let go and let him go on with his life. When I realized that he hurt too.
You write, it became a source of pride to me that I could sleep with a man and not care for him. I wanted to compete with men, to compete for control of the relationship. I saw them on my terms, on my turf. Is there an abortion factor underlying some feminism in this country? Is that kind of what you're saying, that you were just prototypical of what some other women are experiencing?
Oh, look around, yes. Look at those women. Clenched fists, clenched teeth. They tell you about their abortion and how great it was, but the problem is they're not happy women. And I believe that is very true. And we failed. I mean, look, we know that feminism has not worked. We recognize that. And yet many young women today have been brought up, have literally cut their teeth on feminism, and are out there carrying on, unfortunately, what my generation taught them. And my own daughter is one of those.
Now, you mentioned you even had your 14-year-old daughter helping you in the abortion clinic?
My son stood up to me and told me that abortion was wrong. And because he was, of course, did not have any idea what he was doing to me, he had no idea about my own abortion. Then I made my daughter work in the abortion clinic because I needed someone to affirm me. And whether she wanted to or not, I made her. I never asked her. And when we left, one of the very first things she said was, "I'm so glad I never had an abortion." And that child was working in the abortion clinic because I made her, and she was pro-life.
What's happened to that relationship with your daughter today?
We're rebuilding. It's not been easy, but the one thing that I had, the only thing I suppose that the Lord let me have through this whole thing was the relationship with my children. And it's been very, very destructive at times. It's also been very difficult. But the one thing we've done is we've stuck together, and we've kicked through it and talked through it, and we're still working. But the problem with that, Bob, is the result of the sin in my daughter's life, and it's not the sins of the father. Those are the sins of the mother. And for me to see those things and to live with those on a daily basis are very difficult. But God is good, and He's working through it. We've a long way to go, but we're on the road.
Now, initially, you worked for another abortion clinic before you started your own, correct?
Yes.
What can you tell us about that particular situation as to how the clinic was run, what the attitude of the people was, what their philosophy was toward life?
Well, their attitude was just the same as what it was in my clinics. As a matter of fact, I took his best abortionist because it's not if, it's when you kill a woman, not a baby, a woman. You need an abortionist willing to help you in the cover-up. But, you know, we talked about how many fingers and toes are we putting down the disposal today. If a little eyeball would go through the tube, we'd say, "Here's looking at you." We were very open.
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt you, Carol, but you're throwing some one-liners out here that are just amazing. An eyeball came down the tube and they say, "Here's looking at you"?
Yes.
That kind of insensitivity pervaded the abortion environment?
Yes. We knew what we were doing. But I trained those women every time they saw something to think, "We're helping the woman, we're helping the woman, we're helping the woman."
And you counted the fingers going down the disposal. I mean, was there no sense among these people that those were the parts of a living being? I mean, was it the old product of uterine product or a fetal whatever? I mean,
Product of conception.
That was it.
We knew they were babies. We had to put them back together. We had to make sure every part was there. We had to count the arms, the legs, the hands, the feet to be sure they were all there. There was no question in our minds that we were killing babies. But the people inside the abortion clinic do not come there because their lives are perfect. They come there out of a hurt, a terrible hurt, a pain. And so what you see are they deal with it with where they are in life. And, you know, if you're hurting and you're denying some other pain, you tell yourself that you're helping those women, and you start to believe it. Even though you know it's not true, you start to believe it because you want to believe it.
You became so successful, you set out on your own. Tell me what it was like starting an abortion clinic.
Well, that was the way I could be a millionaire. And so I knew in order to be a millionaire that I had to do 40,000 abortions a year, and I had to have 5 abortion clinics to do that. And so I was very careful. I selected my sites well. I took the best abortionist that worked for me, because, you know, you've got to have that abortionist when you kill a woman, as I said earlier. And we opened our clinics, and we had some strong criteria. They made money day one, and they paid for themselves in the first month.
So this is really money-driven, strictly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If a business person understood the abortion business, the sad thing is, from the outside looking in, it looks like the business to be in. And it's not until you start killing babies on a day-to-day basis that you understand the truth of what it is, and by then you're caught up in it and can't get out.
How many abortions were you involved in, I mean, in terms of the clinic that you worked with and then the clinics that you ran? Any idea?
35,000 total.
35,000.
35,000.
And you sold some of these abortions to women who weren't even pregnant?
Yes.
How did you do that?
Well, a woman's scared when she comes in, and so what you do is you capitalize on that fear. You find the fear, you identify the fear, and every time she moves away, you say, well, your parents will find out. You know, if you have this abortion, your parents won't know. They'll never be hurt. And get your money together, come on in. Your husband doesn't have to know. You don't have to drop out of drill team. Whatever it is, you find the fear and identify it and use it. Use it to affirm that abortion decision. And it's very easy. Women have been told that this is their right. The children, the young people today have been brought up believing that this is the way to go. We have 20 years of young people out there who have never thought there was another way. It's pretty easy to sell an abortion. It's really easy if you're dealing with someone who's young and whose parents are going to find out and she's scared that they're going to find out. It's much easier to sell an abortion to a teenager than to an adult.
You point out in your book, The Scarlet Lady, that we take a practitioner trained to do good. We use that training to do evil. Tell me, what takes place in the psyche of a doctor or a nurse whose presumed training is the preservation of life to then become involved in doing something like this? What type of philosophical shift has to occur within their conscience and emotions and mind to be able to do that?
In retrospect, Bob, I can look back and tell you that I saw their lives fall apart before my very eyes, but I didn't understand it at the time because I was involved in it. But you would see someone come to work for you, a good doctor who'd just come out of school, was ready to set up practice, just needed some extra money, start doing abortion. He would start having affairs. Then he'd start drinking, and then he'd start doing drugs. And this doctor with such promise, would start going right down the tube. I never really understood it at the time, but I saw it time and time again, and I now know that abortion destroys not only the baby, not only the mother, but it destroys the perpetrators also.
I'm talking with Carol Everett. She is currently director of the Pro-Life Division of Marketplace Christian Network. She is the woman about whom the book The Scarlet Lady has been written. It is her autobiography of sorts, a confession of a successful abortionist, says the subtitle, and she was involved for a number of years in the abortion industry, eventually starting successfully running her own abortion clinics, and she is now pro-life, and she is now a Christian, and she very candidly expresses her ideas. Let me just read to you something from page 212 of her book, because it's hard to believe that people who appear to have such lofty ethics could have this kind of thinking. But she says, when we finished the violent act of killing the baby, we took it to the central supply room, reassembled and counted the parts, put them down the commercial heavy-duty garbage disposal, and turned it on. We listened as the blade shredded the head, body, arms, legs, hands, and feet. It was much like grinding the meat scraps to make hamburger meat in the meat market. I was evil enough to be involved. 35,001 mutilations. Evil enough to push those body parts into the commercial disposal and grind them to bits. Now, Carol, those were human identifiable parts. They were parts which you reassembled like a jigsaw puzzle. Surely, as you put them together somewhere deep inside you, you had to say this is not a glob of tissue. This is definably human. What takes place within the conscience of an abortionist that can experience this without apparent remorse at the time?
Again, Bob, every abortionist is so hurt. There's so much pain in the lives of those people who are inside the abortion clinics. And, you know, I knew they were babies. I never said they were a glob of tissue to anyone except a young woman about to buy an abortion. To myself, I knew what they were. But I always told myself, and I trained my people, you're helping the woman, you're helping the woman, you're helping the woman. And that's what I wanted to believe, and that's what I did believe for some 6, 7 years.
This is the end of Side 1. Please turn the cassette over at this point for the continuation of the message on Side 2.
You talk about how the abortion is performed, how the head must be located and crushed. You know, I've been friends with Dr. Wilkie and other people in the pro-life movement for years, and I'm very familiar with the literature, the movies and videos and so on. But there are many people listening to us right now who maybe don't have that advantage of familiarity and don't really know what's going on when an abortion is being performed. So would you walk us through, there are several types of abortions, as we know, from suction to saline, etc. Walk us through what happens in an abortion and categorize it as to type so that, and I'm asking you not to go easy on us with the language and the description here, we need to know what happens.
The most common abortion technique in the nation is the suction method, the vacuum suction method, and that is when a machine that's very similar to a vacuum cleaner is used. But the woman's uterus is first numbed if she's awake, and if she's asleep, of course not. Then her cervix is cleaned, and this happens in every abortion procedure. And then her uterus would be numbed at this point if she were awake. And then dilation would occur using very little pencil-like dilators that gradually increase in size. The size of her uterus, the cervix, the mouth of the womb, is dilated so it's large enough to accommodate the cannula. Now, what's a cannula? A cannula is an instrument that was designed as the vacuum cleaner part of the suction machine. It's 6 to 8 inches long. The diameter depends on the size of the baby. It can be very, very small, half an inch in diameter to a 16 millimeter, which is much, much larger, about an inch in diameter. But this has a curved edge at the top designed not to perforate the uterus, with little sharp openings on the side designed to scrape the baby off the wall of the uterus, and then the opening is there, which of course removes the baby. And so after the dilation has occurred, the abortionist inserts the cannula to the top of the mother's uterus, turns it against the wall, scrapes down, and the suction removes the baby piece by piece as he goes all the way around the mother's uterus. Very fast. Abortionists can easily do 10 to 12 abortions an hour. I used to say any abortionist worth his salt could do 10 to 12 abortions an hour first trimester if he used 2 teams of 2 women across the hall, room to room.
How much money?
10 to 12 abortions an hour, you make a minimum of $75 per abortion, so $750 to $900 an hour.
Oof.
That's the minimum abortionist can make.
Oh, my word.
And we paid them in cash, no 1099s, no W-2s. But then the baby's muscle structure becomes so strong that you can't use the vacuum suction method, and so you use a couple of other methods. Now, the saline method is not used as much as it once was because there are too many live births. We have some 15 people working in the pro-life movement who are abortion survivors, so stay away from the saline if you can. But with the saline in the 2nd trimester and 3rd trimester abortions, they would insert the saline or prostaglandin into the sac surrounding the baby. The baby breathes the amniotic fluid prior to birth, and so what would happen was this fluid would suffocate the baby because it would breathe it into its lungs and it would kill it. Yes, the saline burned the baby's skin, but that's not how the baby died. The baby died from suffocation. But these mothers had a terrible time, too, because while the mothers could feel that baby dying, they knew they were killing their baby, and some of these deaths went on for 36 hours before the baby stopped kicking. Terrible, slow, agonizing death. Very few of them were fast. A fast one was 2.5 to 3 hours. But then the woman has to be given a drug, Pitocin, which makes her uterus contract, dilates her uterus, and she gives birth to this perfectly whole baby. And if it's a saline abortion, it was burned, and she saw what she'd done to her own child. These women were so traumatized, they did not come out and tell about these abortions, and they're just starting to. But there were too many problems, again, the live births and the labor, and so in the second trimester, we went to something known as the D&E, dilation and evacuation, and that's where the uterus is dilated, but using much larger dilators now. An instrument called Beerhoff forceps is inserted. Now, these are round instruments, but they crush the baby in utero and remove it piece by piece by piece, reconstruct it to be sure it's all there, put it down the garbage disposal, and she's gone.
Now, when you say kill the baby, crush the baby, at what point is the life of the child taken?
The life of the child is normally taken in the first squeeze of the instrument. That was the thing. We tried to get the umbilical cord and do something to dismember that child, something so it would start bleeding so that it would die instantly. But, you know, it didn't die instantly. I'm sure it felt much of this dismemberment.
And you crush the head.
That's the last part. And that's the hardest part to get out, usually. And so you suck the brain out, and then you crush the head using big instruments. But as you remove that baby's head, you know, the little bones can tear the mother's cervix. If you go in and, you know, the uterus is very thin in the second and third trimester, and you break a leg, and as you pull that leg out, it just slices the side of the mother's uterus. As you go back in, you, instead of getting the baby for the next pull out, you pull the mother's bowel through her vagina. Lots of colostomies, lots of hysterectomies, major surgeries for women. My own experience was 1 out of 500 the last 18 months either had hysterectomies, colostomies, and we had one woman die.
Tell us about that.
Girl was a beautiful, young, 32-year-old, beautiful woman, and she didn't have the money. I had the distinct displeasure now of sending her away to get more money before we would abort her. She had to get her money and come back, and she came back, and I was in the room. My job with two of the abortionists was to hold the baby still while they did the abortions and tell him the head's here, the feet are here, the buttocks are here, and push the baby down into the instruments. I didn't do it on this particular one. I was training another woman, and but I remember Cheryl, and this was something she didn't want to do, but she had to do it. She had to do it to save her relationship. And she was very still. It was a very painful procedure, but she was most cooperative. Took her into the recovery room, and I went up front to do some book work, and it seemed just a few minutes, but the abortionist came up front, took me back, and as we turned into the recovery room, he was telling me there was a problem, which I was very much aware of because he did not come to my office to get me, but I saw blood everywhere. I've never seen so much blood, and obviously working in an abortion clinic, blood doesn't scare me. I'm an operating room technician. But there was blood on the walls or blood on the curtains between the beds. Cheryl was in a pool of blood, literally in a pool of blood in the bed. And my friend, Dr. Johnson, said, Carol, you know, she's past the clot. She's going to stop bleeding. Everything's going to be okay. Have the nurse massage the fundus, the top of the uterus. Her uterus will clamp down. When she stops bleeding, send her home. I have a date. The margaritas are waiting. I've got to go. Left me. And I was pretty devastated. I did not go back to my office and finish. I stayed right there, and her bleeding did slow down, but her blood pressure was erratic, and that's an indication that there's a problem. But I beeped Dr. Johnson, couldn't find him, paged him, I should say, and finally I discharged her late that night with a promise from her boyfriend that he would call if anything happened because they wanted to go home, and she was just in the bed getting weaker and weaker by the moment. At 3 o'clock in the morning, her boyfriend called Dr. Johnson and said she's cramping, and without taking a history, he said put her in a tub of hot water. That opens the woman's uterus, and what happens is normally the clots will come out, her uterus will clamp back down, and everything will be fine. But in this instance, it was the last blood in Cheryl's body. And as he put her in that tub of hot water, all of the blood in her body was literally just sucked out by that hot water. And she was technically dead. Her boyfriend called Dr. Johnson back and said she stopped breathing. He said to get her to the hospital, and she was dead on arrival. They started fluids, but she never had a chance.
Did not a family member, the boyfriend, or anybody try to press charges?
Bob, they were so worried about this hitting the press. They were more worried about it being found out in the press than that we were. Her boyfriend felt guilty. He did not want her mother to know. She had a 17-year-old and a 2-year-old child. He cooperated with us in the cover-up, literally. Her mother said at one point she had an abortion, didn't she? And Dr. Johnson never answered. And that woman never knew why her daughter died. But, you know, her children may find me. And that is certainly my hope. But, you know, today something happened, Bob. I don't know if you read about Jenny in the book, but the girl with the colostomy, the beautiful model.
Right.
And this morning, Jenny called me and said, Carol, do you remember me? And I said, I've been praying that you'd find me for 9 years. And she said, am I the Jenny in the book? And I said, yes, you're the Jenny in the book.
Just recount that story briefly, would you please, for the people who don't know it and obviously haven't read the book.
Jenny was about the age of my children, and she was a beautiful girl, and it's one of the few babies that I ever remember moving to the point that I had to really hold still in its mother's uterus, and she was 22 weeks pregnant. And my friend Dr. Johnson, my abortionist, was doing that abortion, and I'll never forget the first time he went in, everything was normal. We were kind of laughing and joking and business as usual, and he pulled out placenta, which is normal. But the second time he went in her uterus with the Beerhoff forceps, what he pulled out was her bowel. He had obviously perforated her uterus on the first time in, and the second time in, he pulled her bowel out through her vagina. And we've got some real problems. This baby is still alive. This is a woman who's 20 to 22 weeks pregnant. You can't go in a hospital and do an abortion at that time. Any hospital you go in is going to be alarmed. They're going to try to save the baby. This woman doesn't want the baby. Where do you transport her? Because you are obviously transporting a simple botched abortion at this point. How are you going to say to anyone, hey, we just missed this one? You can't. And so we took her not to the closest hospital, not to the hospital that would take the best care of her. We put her in my car because an ambulance is terrible publicity in front of an abortion clinic, and took her across town to a hospital that would protect us, the doctor and the clinic. But, Bob, on this one, I asked my daughter to go with me, and so I saw this abortion through Kelly's eyes. Kelly was in the back holding the IV. Jenny was in the front seat with me. I was driving, and every time we'd go over the smallest little bump, Jenny would cry out in pain. And my daughter's eyes, I will never forget, because she was seeing me in different light. I know she was asking herself, is this my mother? Is this woman my mother? The woman that's doing this to this girl, that's taking her across town, that's covering this botched abortion up. And Jenny had a colostomy. Her bowel had to be resectioned. We all know that empties into a bag that hangs down her legs. Jenny called me and told me she didn't feel very pretty, and I didn't feel pretty either. We worked with Jenny. The abortionist had an affair with Jenny, so she would not sue us.
The abortionist?
Yes. A man literally old enough to be her father, but she was attracted to him, and he took advantage of that.
And to this day she has to carry a bag?
Her colostomy has been reversed, and she's been trying to get pregnant since that, and she hasn't been able to conceive. So work with me on this one.
I and I'm sure everyone listening to you, Carol, I'm sitting here kind of, getting my breath, kind of, saying the immensity of the guilt, of the sin of these actions, outside of God's grace and mercy, outside of knowing we are forgiven. How can you deal with this? How could any woman, any abortionist, how can anyone cope with this outside of the mercy and grace of God? What do they do? But they turn to drugs, alcohol, promiscuity, or whatever.
It destroys them. And I see that in my old friends. I see that in Harvey Johnson, who called me about 2 months ago and apologized for what he did to me 9 years ago, and I was able to say it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And he said to me, Carol, I'm looking death in the face. I'm dying. There's nothing in my life. And I talked to him for a few minutes about getting right, but he's heard the gospel, and he's rejected it. So I would ask your listeners, if Harvey Johnson comes to their mind, to pray for him, because it's a very empty world out there without the Lord.
You write in the book, just being able to sleep at night, knowing I didn't kill a baby today, is a relief. I don't have to worry about the baby that was too big to go down the disposal being found in the trash can I had to dump it into. I don't have that cold feeling anymore. To the woman who has experienced an abortion and who has not experienced the grace and mercy of God, what is the difference?
I would say to that woman, there is hope. I understand that you think you've committed the unforgivable sin, but Jesus Christ died on the cross, yes, even for our sin of killing our own child. And we must ask him to forgive us for our sins and confess those sins and ask him to come into our heart as our Lord and Savior, and to come into our heart to let us know he's there and to free us from all this guilt and pain. And there is hope. There is an answer.
This is a time, Carol, in which many people who have been active in the pro-life movement are understandably somewhat discouraged, and depending on when people will be hearing our conversation, things may get better, they may get worse. It doesn't look good at this particular time. We do not have in the White House a pro-life president. There already are signals from the Supreme Court. They may be less inclined to rule favorably on behalf of the pro-life movement, as in the recent Guam decision. This is not a time in which the pro-life movement has a lot of encouragement, and there has been encouragement over the last 8 to 10 years. There have been some good, positive things that have given us hope. So what might you say to those who feel a little discouraged right now and may not be as inclined to get involved in the pro-life movement as they once were, because the social tide seems to at least temporarily be turning against us?
November the 3rd was a black day for me. But I realized something. I've been expecting the president to appoint Supreme Court justices that would reverse Roe v. Wade. I knew I had been looking to man, not to God. It was confirmed when the court refused to hear the Guam case. But we have everything and more than we need in God. And what we've got to understand is his people must get involved. We must get involved, and we must start talking about Christian principles. You don't have to say line and verse every time you utter a Christian principle. God's truth will stand in any environment just as true. And I think the problem is that we Christians have allowed, and sadly enough, the pro-life movement has not had allegiance to Jesus Christ as their leader. You know, in many of them, they've even ignored Jesus Christ. They said, hey, we're going to do it ourselves. And there, of course, have been some groups that have put Christ at the forefront. But those are the ones that are coming right on up. And we've got to remember that we as his people have an obligation. And the sad thing is that 1 out of 6 women walking through the doors of an abortion clinic, no, 1 out of 6 women sitting in our church pews has been through the doors of an abortion clinic. They're hurting. 70% of the young women that present at the abortion clinic will tell you that they're Christians. They've been in church in the last 2 weeks. 54% will tell you they've been in church in the last 2 weeks.
Boy, that's startling.
Well, they want to get God's people. They're not after the world. They're after God's people, because this is something that destroys God's institution of the family. And we've got to understand it. And we as God's people have got to stop sitting in our pews. You know, it's real comfortable to go to finger food dinners or potluck dinners or Bible studies. And those are all well and good, and I'm certainly saying, yes, we should continue those, but we've got to take our Christian principles out into the streets. That's where they're needed.
What does the future hold for you as a former abortion entrepreneur, as a lady who, by your own description, had it all, the money, men, the houses, the cars, the business opportunities and the success. Life is not like that now. And since you have espoused a pro-life ethic, it has to have made major changes. You've already said at least now you can sleep at night. But what does the future hold for you now that you are speaking out on behalf of the pro-life movement?
No one's ever asked me that question. I don't know. But I know that God is working in my life. I'm probably going to stop speaking quite so much. I've been speaking about 25 days a month, and that's too much. And I have not been working much in Texas. We did the life chain in Texas this last year. There were 10 year before last. This year we had 89 life chains. My goal for this year is 300, but we're doing the Texas Day of Prayer on March the 30th. We're taking about 20,000 Texans to our state capital, 20,000 plus, to say to each of our elected officials, I'm praying for you for specific wisdom for pro-life, pro-family issues, and give them a card, leave a sweet taste in their mouth, leave them with a little baked good or something. Mm-hmm. And those are my immediate goals for this next year. But, you know, God has been so good to me. And I just want the world to know that Jesus Christ of Nazareth is still alive and well. And, you know, Bob, he was the ultimate crisis pregnancy. Mm-hmm. The ultimate crisis pregnancy is the reason that we have eternal life. And I think we have much to stand up for.
Carol, I thank you for joining with us. It is obvious to anyone who listens very carefully to you that as a woman of zeal, enthusiasm, fervor, and gutsiness, you are also very tenderly touched by the realities of what your life has been and where you are headed in the future. And for anybody who has seen what you've seen, now to say what you say, it is truly a modern-day miracle for which we thank God, and our prayers are with you, and we can only ask that God grant you continued opportunities to make the message known that this Scarlet Lady is now covered by the blood of Christ, the past is behind, and that you can go forward in God's goodness and grace to reverse many of the wrongs by speaking as forcefully as you have. And one more word that you might share on behalf of that young woman right now who feels terribly pressured to have that abortion. Perhaps it's a boyfriend, and she wants to try and save the relationship. Perhaps it is the parent who is fearful that the family will be shamed. Perhaps it's a friend who says, come on now. I know lots of girls who have had this happen, and it's no big deal. And she's teetering on the brink, prepared to walk into that abortion clinic, and she's got all this social pressure, all this relational pressure. What do you say to that young woman?
I've been there, and I was 16. I went to the abortion clinic when I was 28. It destroyed my baby. It destroyed my life. It destroyed my family. But I wish you could meet that young man that I gave birth to when I was barely 17 years old. You know, by the time a young woman knows she's pregnant, that baby's been strong enough to do two things. First of all, it stopped your period, and that's why you know you're pregnant. And those hormones are making changes inside your body that you feel in other ways, maybe a little nausea in the morning. But that baby's heart started beating 18 days after conception. That baby has a brain wave at 42 days after conception. It's not a part of your body. It's a body inside your body because you see it can be a different blood type, a different sex. It has rights and choices too. It may be tough to give life, but you know, that's what women are all about. And the marvelous thing about that is that no man can ever have a baby. That's the one thing we can do that no man can ever do. And I ask you to just sit there for just a minute and just identify with those feelings. Identify with that baby. Put your hand over your stomach, over your abdomen, and just say, I know you're there. There are people out there who will help you. There are people who want to help you continue that pregnancy, whatever it takes. There are places you can live. There are people that will take care of you and will love you. And if you choose to parent that child, they'll be there for you. And if you choose to place that baby for adoption, they'll be there for you. It may not be easy, but life is the answer.
Carol, I thank you for joining us, Carol Everett. The book is called The Scarlet Lady, and if you want to know more about her work with the Pro-Life Division of Marketplace Christian Network, please contact Compassion Connection at Box 36C, Denver 80236, and we'll be happy to pass that information on to you. Thank you again for joining us, Carol.
Thank you.
This is the end of the message. For further information regarding other topics available on cassette and in printed form, write Compassion Connection, Box 36C, Denver, Colorado 80236.